Good evening, everyone. My name is Lucy Handley. I do adult programs at the Ridgefield Library. And tonight we have Barb Jennis, our host and the conceiver of Poems from Connecticut's Four Corners. Barb is an award-winning poet whose collection, Blinded Birds, was awarded the International Book Award for a Poetry Chapbook in 2022. She served as the Poet Laureate of Ridgefield from 2020 to 2023. Her latest chapbook, Flown, will be out on Tuesday. And for those of you who are local, we'll be celebrating her at the library on May 7th. Welcome, Barb.
Well, thank you, Lucy. And I'm so glad to see you all in the audience tonight. This is wonderful. I'm sure people are going to continue popping in because we're starting, even though we're starting a few minutes late, we always get stragglers in, and that's just fine. While we're waiting, I wanted to mention a few things that we have coming up, always willing to share. On May 1st, we have, hold on, share screen. May 1st, we have a new Poet Laureate showcase as our reading for poems from Connecticut's Four Corners. I will put the link if you'd like to register in the chat. We have Susan Powers from Scotland, Nazima Hutchings from Enfield, Nadia Sims from Manchester, Steve Alou from Thompson, and Judith Liebman from Branford. So we're really looking forward to that reading, as always. And then let me stop share. And I think that's what I wanted to mention. We have, it's always the first Wednesday of the month that we have the poems from Connecticut's Four Corners readings, and they're great because it's sort of a sampler from all different parts of the state, each of the four corners, and a fifth person from the central Hartford region. So I hope you can join us. But tonight, as another wonderful salute to National Poetry Month, woohoo! And I actually have it right side reading tonight. I had it backwards last time. We have two Connecticut State Poet Laureates, Poets Laureate, if you prefer it that way. We have Antoinette Brim-Bell, and then also Mercuri Lam, who is the Youth State Poet Laureate. So we're going to have Antoinette read first, and then Mercuri will follow her, and then we'll have a discussion between the two of them, asking each other questions, saying, maybe perhaps talking about what their hopes are for their own writing and for serving in their laureate positions. Please, if you want to make comments as the poets read in the chat, please feel free to do so. We are recording, so we ask that you keep your sound off until the end if you have a question to ask then. So, okay, so let me just start off by reading Antoinette's biography. And this, by the way, is a shortened biography. You can read her full biography in the chat when I'm done. So Antoinette Brim-Bell, also has been published as Antoinette Brim, is Connecticut's 8th State Poet Laureate. She is the author of 3 full-length collections, These Women You Gave Me, which she read from brilliantly this past weekend at Mercy by the Sea, Icarus in Love, and Psalm of the Sunflower. She is a Cave Canem Foundation Fellow and an alumna of Voices of Our Nation's Arts Foundation, also known as VONA. Her poetry has appeared in Poetry Magazine, Poem a Day, and many other journals. A printmaker and collage artist also, Brim-Bell has exhibited at venues throughout Connecticut. She serves as secretary of the board of directors of Indolent Arts Foundation, is a past board member of One World Progressive Institute, and a past president of the board of directors of the Creative Arts Workshop in New Haven. A sought-after speaker, which is why she's here tonight, editor, educator, and consultant, Brim-Bell is professor of English at Capital Community College in Hartford. So welcome, Antoinette.
Well, thank you. Thank you so very much for having me. I'm always so excited to read with youth poets because I'm excited to see, where poetry is going and to know that poetry is in good hands. So I am going to read a few poems and then I'm going to turn it over to Mercuri so that I can enjoy her work. I'm going to start with a poem that is fashioned after Wallace Stevens' 13 Ways of Looking at a Blackbird. As I was reading Mercuri's work earlier in the day, this kind of came to mind because she has a wonderful perspective in her poems, a seeing that goes beyond seeing. So this poem begins with an epigraph. If you can see, look, from the novel Blindness by Jose Saramago. 13 ways of looking. Because I want to know, my eyes break common prisms into scattered light, gather up the rods into buckets of blues, gotta see to know, gotta see to know, gotta know to see. Scaffolds of blues, gallows of light, built on 3 layers of tissue paper sight, fill the cone with spotless second sight. Understand? Monochrome blind, one color allowed. Snow blind, white light to excess. Moon blind, nowhere, nowhere to go, no path to follow. A man and his vision are one. Just telling you what I know. Through a glass darkly, Hooke's microscope, Galileo's telescope, Benjamin's spectacles, a keyhole, an emerald, a glass of water, noses smudges on the window, an ancient steamy breath on glass, magnify the scope of hopeful, watchful eyes waiting earnestly at the window. Left to right, right to left, the truth is written in dotted permutations, calligraphed characters, code, alpha to omega, on papyrus, rice, wood, stone. Trace the shadows with your fingertips, your eyes, your lips. Big Mama was a seer, born that way, always knowing, could see the bitter winter coming in the glow of the firefly. Fish in her dreams could see sons and daughters in their mother's eyes. She saw sickness before it come in the color of skin and nails. Big Mama was a seer, saw death walking up the path, went right on out to meet it. Seeing has a lucid, inescapable rhythm, the drum of fingernails on a wooden table, a syncopated alternating heel and palm pound, a deeply held stare that bores deeper down with each heartbeat, with each swell of breath, the rhythm births a dance. The sway of inspection, introspection, a slow chin tilt, an eyebrow pinch, lifted gaze, lowered gaze, the understanding nod. There is no such thing as out of sight. What has been seen cannot be unseen. Epiphany ensues, peekaboo, when vision is clear, hide and seek. The bards of old understood, I spy and philosophize with mine own eye. Even the blind see, in taps and touch, they do not fear the shadow's assault. Their ears grow wise, noses discern, tongues taste, tears on the air, take care, they can't be fooled. Light floods in a constant stream, even in darkness, light finds its way. Old folks call kids nosy, but they smile inside when they say it, 'cause nosy kids grow, see, look, know. So I'm going to read a couple of ekphrastic poems. As a visual artist, I'm always enamored with the work of other visual artists and like to reflect on them in poetry. So this is upon viewing Kanat Shakam's painting, Waiting, 39. The artist smeared ultramarine blue onto the canvas, the way the lonely smear their blood onto asylum walls, thick and warm, frightfully fluid and dark, a poignant background to the black strokes of calligraphed trees rising into scribbles of despair where black letter turns signal upon a waiting woman's head and tendrils down into folds of white linen and delicate white wrists clasped behind her back, and then into a twist of orange about her neck, a crawl of orange twining up a tree trunk, color enough to capture the eye and balance, the unbalanced scribble of wanton time, with two trails of hope in primary yellow. I was also fascinated by by a piece of art by Pablo Picasso, and it's called A Woman Ironing. It's from his Blue period in 1904. Thank you note to Picasso. I too have been the woman ironing, with only one dagger of a shoulder pointing heavenward, all else homebound, a tethered resolve to smooth and straighten. When a woman works, scarcely few notice the palette of blues she becomes, parched lips in snowflake, or the bruised crescents under her eyes, least of all her hair fading to powder. Not in fields of heather, nor tomes of poetry, instead she labors in the blue agent of laundry, never ends. It circles from bureau to body to basket, into scrub board blue-veined hands, and then it hangs out, threatening. It hangs under threatening skies to dry. Only a woman irons, with only one dagger of a shoulder pointing heavenward, all else homebound, tethered. So I'm going to read one more ekphrastic piece. It's a well-known painting by Van Gogh, Starry Night, but I had the opportunity to see it in a Van Gogh immersive, which was absolutely amazing because you could feel yourself step into the painting. And if you ever have an opportunity to go to one of those immersive experiences, I would say, please go. It was absolutely beautiful and brought tears to my eyes. Woman sees starry night. She leaned in too far, looked in too closely, inhaled far too deeply. She breathes in the insane staccato stutter of color. Her mouth fills with a tempest of climbing moss green. Her nose clogs with waves of blush. All at once she is drowning in the moving stillness of oil on canvas. She is being wrapped so tightly in a matrix of color she cannot escape. The blue realm is awash in rushing silence, too loud to be quiet. Were her hands not tied in throes of umber, she would have pressed them against her ears. Bursts of white light explode behind her closed eyes. Rough turquoise scrapes her shins. Slivers of marigold cut her knuckles through to the white meat. She leaned in too far, looked in too closely, inhaled the insane staccato stutter of color. She only wanted to see what he saw, glimpse the duende that made a world of flat canvas. She just wanted to know him, perhaps find him in the mountains that seemed too far, too high to scale, but low enough to fly over. There is no room to move or orient. There is only color, color counting time, color singing and shouting and spitting into her face, all because she wanted to know him. She notices a small church hugging the ground. Its pale, whitewashed blue steeple moans a fervent prayer for morning. She longs to rest in its pews, to feel the familiar pull of gravity, to be sure. But she is Icarus being pulled into his crude representation of the moon. Tangerine crescent, apricot halo, a hint of lemon backshadow. She feels herself yielding. She is willing to be shattered into pieces of color. Thank you.
Beautiful, Antoinette. I love ekphrastic poetry, and I loved especially, I could really connected with the Picasso one of the woman ironing. So thank you so much. Mercury, how are you?
I'm good. I'm
Oh,
very
good.
excited. What Antoinette read really resonated with me. And I also had a lot of ekphrasis, so I'm very interested to see how these two poems connect, or how my poems connect to hers. And yeah.
Wonderful. Now, you had sent me another biography, a little bit different from the one I received. Would you post that when you get a chance so everyone can see it? You sent it directly to me, but if you would post it in the chat so they have it, I'll read it. But if you, while I'm reading it, if you would post it to everyone in the chat instead of just a direct message to everyone. Good, you got it now. So it says, hold on. Saturn Brown is the inaugural Connecticut State Youth Poet Laureate, an East Coast Asian American Student Union artist in residence, and the author of BLOODPATHS. Her work has appeared in South Florida Poetry Journal, Gone Lawn, Gasher, Olney, Ionia Review, Connecticut River Review, Beaver Mag, and more. And she has received recognition by the Pulitzer Center, Foyle Young Poets, Fox 61, NBC, Smith College, Collins University, and Best of the Net. She has performed at Yale University, Barnard College, Houston Children's Museum, and elsewhere. A Chinese Vietnamese immigrant from China, Saturn is an incoming undergraduate student at Yale University. So now, Mercury, is Saturn your nom de plume?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, good. Thank you. So take it away.
Okay, the first poem that I have today is titled Daughterhood. This is actually a poem that I got published in the Connecticut River Review, so that's why I wanted to start it off. I call my father on Sundays to ask for recipes, how to mix together my love and wanting into a bowl, steam it with dates and ginkgo leaves. Every so often, I see myself in the mirror and stare. I am not the daughter my mother made me to be. Even the room I live in feels too cagey, the floor covered in wax and the skin I shed in waking. All day long I sit by lamps, let the sun settle behind blinds until the only light left is a mirage of warmth and the time I sacrifice to grief. When my mother comes, she sighs and begins to clean. She's used to it by now. This pile of ash and smoke, tenderness walking. I open up windows to breathe, and only when she leaves do I close the walls between myself and my apologies. Mother, you ask if I want to be mended. Of course I do, but I can't find the parts of myself in what isn't lonely. So that was the first poem. The second poem I have is called Unshelling. So I grew up in China, and this talks a little bit about that and my heritage and how I interact with those two together. I'm never quite sure what I'm looking for. Perhaps the spaces between an oyster shell and its closing, the sand all gone. Like my mother's mother, I hunt for mollusks in the river outside our old village at the heel of a mountain. Pry open rock-hard shells of scallops to reveal the soft-bodied animals of their beings. Sundown, we haul wooden baskets back home, carrying lost light past the unevenness of clay dirt roads, unwinding itself to the night. My wrists still damp from water clogging up the red strings for protection my grandmother tied to me at birth. Something so binding and free all at once. Back home, we cut up vermicelli and scallion, steaming the flesh in steel pots. Under burning oil lights, my grandmother's face yellows like the moon I see as I peel open the mussels between shells and lift the pearls out one by one. The beads still shining with the light of 1,000 rivers and the river and the water I drown in when I kiss the shells goodbye. So that was the second poem. The third poem, it's pretty new. It's actually not published. I wrote this in December. So it's very different in voice and just tone and theme as some of my other pieces, but I do really like it, and I think it represents kind of like where my writing is going right now. It's titled Trolley Problem. Beyond the crunch of borderline and metal, there was only the sound heat of our bodies lying against the commuter rail and its windows. September, and already the leaves have fallen on the route to Portland. I wonder where we are, how we got here, where we're escaping next. West of Niantic, we'd stopped to see the maple trees. Your first time so far up north, you were amazed. I shot a Polaroid of you with the same bluntness as the tip of an arrowhead, soft and violent into your chest. Stillness is still a state of motion. Sign language remains a language. The cold wind had been bitter and ruthless. I shifted between my jacket uncomfortably. It was true. I knew my facts. Knew that 50% of marriages end in divorce. Knew that trains go at 200 miles per hour. Knew that there are more than 1,000 crashes per year. But what then? What then? Is the fact that our bodies collide enough to assume love? I left the cigarette burning too long, stomped it out along with the film after you left. For some reason, I had the feeling I never see you again, that your cries um and my resolve the night before would soon fade into ambiance. Yet I didn't feel sickened by the idea. You could have been anyone else, and the results would have landed all the same. A route I knew the ending of without fail. Here I confess. I was wretched, I knew, but still you pretended not to care. You'd peer into my eyes, and all I could do was laugh silently. Maybe I'm being nonsensical. I apologize. This grief, I don't know if I can ever explain it. Um, so that was my third poem. And I have two more. Is that okay? Okay, or maybe three more. One of them is very short. So this one, it's called Silver Bodies, Golden Hearts. It was also in my poetry collection, BLOODPATHS, which was like examining motherhood, heritage, and also just like through the idea of water and like bodies of water and how like both of these things interact. And this one is kind of like an anti-love story, which I really like. It's in like little like sections too. So here we go. One, a boy found a nymph in a silver lake deep in the woods. He knelt down and kissed the nymph at the space where the water met the soil. This was called prayer. There was something about the way the light from the water reflected on his face that made him all the more willing to kiss it. Perhaps it was narcissism. Perhaps it was self-hatred. Both of these things came into waves for him. 2. The boy bought the nymph's flowers to appease her. Problem was, the nymph didn't want flowers. What good were flowers when you could have pearls? The nymph wanted something else, something she knew the boy would not give. 3. Every day the boy came back with something. Every day the boy came back with nothing at all. Everything could be nothing if you saw it differently. The nymph grew tired of his existence. It was overwhelming and disappointing all at once. 4. Somehow love finished running its course in the rivers. Somehow the patience of the boy began to whittle down like sunlight. It had been a long winter. The earth was cold and cruel to him. He dreamt of the lake at times like this, how the water was golden and warm, how it was suddenly summer again. But when he opened his eyes, he'd only see the nymph waiting for him impatiently beneath the ice. Her body all silver, all cold, all lies. 5. Finally, the boy was convinced. He took out his heart and dipped it into the lake. It turned silver. Now his heart was no longer gold and bright and pumping. It had become cold, like all the blood in his veins and the marrow in his bones. He looked up at the nymph, but she'd already swam away. Her skin beaded with water, and the reflection blinded his eyes. Okay, that was the 5th one. Um, the 6th one, I feel like I should read something happier. I don't know. I feel like I have no happy poems. It's actually titled Love Poem. It's very aptly named. I wrote this in June. Um, so it was like from a while ago, but I do really like it. And yeah, love poem. All I do nowadays is love badly. I admit this because I'm trying to be honest. When I text Z about his gap year, I've stopped asking the question, how is your life going? But what is really happening to us? I swallow up all my love letters when X calls me the name of his dead brother. In this way, I lie. In this way, I am hiding. I watch a movie where the main character asks, is it better to speak or to die? And I can't seem to find an answer. In the film, boy number 1 chooses to speak. In the end, boy number 1 dies from heartbreak. I don't know whether it's genius or cliche. The theater claps when the movie ends. The man next to me sheds a tear. When I get cell service outside the black box, Y tells me about his mundane life and asks, why are you the only one left texting me? And I can't seem to find an answer anywhere except for the distance. The miles stretching into kilometers between us. I have always wanted to become an empire. So that, and then I have one more poem just to finish it off. I actually wrote this last week. So it's very short. I'm still working on it, but it's called Year of the Dog. And Year of the Dog is when I was born, but in the Chinese zodiac, it also cycles around every 12 years. So this Year of the Dog was specifically 2018, and or when I was 12. Year of the Dog. I was 12. The sandbox still hasn't settled in the backyard. From the bedrooms, the streets remain dark. I was to be happy for another year. I believed in no one except myself, and even then, that was enough. While the world went on, I stayed behind the windows and watched. And still, the car sped into the dawning light, and still, and still. I watched the bypass, the reflection in my mother's glass, uneven floorboards, two-toned walls. How I wished I could steer ahead, but instead my life was collared to me like a dog with its chains. Meanwhile, the world goes on. Meanwhile, the snake eats its own tail. Meanwhile, I kept alive.
Thanks. Wonderful. Thank you. Wonderful. Oh my goodness. I have a question I'd love to float to both of you before you ask each other. And I'm sure a lot of people in the audience would be interested too. Excuse me. Mercury, I'll start with you. How did you become the Youth Poet Laureate of Connecticut? Who I know you had a couple of sponsors or whatever. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I actually came about it in a very, I would say, like circuitous way. I didn't really know that I was gonna become the Youth Poet Laureate at first. I kind of just applied in February because I saw that a position that it was open, and I was like, oh, this would be really interesting. I ended up getting selected, and I was very grateful about that opportunity, and I've been really grateful for my tenure for the past year. And but I think really just like at the time I'd just written the manuscript for my book BLOODPATHS, and I was pretty confident in myself. I also got a few publications, and I think that beyond that, I was just really passionate about writing, but also really passionate about community and advocacy and just like all of these ideas and how they intersected with like and how writing already intersected with the work I did, whether it be in Connecticut or just online or in general. And so I think because of that, I thought that it would be a really great opportunity for me to just like connect more with like Connecticut and the community here, because the community in Connecticut and just like writing in Connecticut was something that I really valued. And so being able to have that opportunity, I think was just really cool. And I'm really glad that I took that step and I, got the position.
That's wonderful. And we're glad you did. Antoinette, how about you? I know is this your second year or your third year?
This is my second year. So you want me to answer the same question?
Yeah, if you don't mind. How does one become a state poet laureate?
Well, when it's time for a state poet laureate to be named, then there goes a call out to the entire state, by which everyone who is a citizen of the state can nominate someone that they think will be good in the position. I think that's very important, that everyone has the opportunity to participate in the process. And when they gather together all of the nominations, then they ask people to apply based on those nominations. And I applied, and like Mercury, I was thrilled to have this opportunity to serve the state. And poetry is my life. I often refer to it as my first language. And so having the opportunity to create programming around poetry, to hear other poets and to encourage them, to connect poets with opportunities, which I've been able to do a lot of, it very much fits in with my lifestyle and the things that I hold dear.
All right. Do either of you have a question for the other?
I am really interested to hear how Mercury got involved in poetry in the beginning. When did you kind of discover it and decide that it was something that you wanted for yourself?
Um, so for me, I think that when I started writing in high school. It was my freshman year, and I didn't start off with poetry. I actually started off writing horoscopes for my school newspaper. Um, Still running 4-year column. I think, it was just a really good way because it showed me that writing could be something that was very lighthearted. It could be something that could be enjoyed by a bunch of people, but it could be also something that, I could write for myself. And just through writing that column, I think I gained a lot of different I learned a lot of different things about how to write, but I also gained a lot more confidence within myself. And then sophomore year, still was like writing horoscopes, but I started also branching out into just trying to write poetry. I think my school had a lot of resources for people who wanted to write. Um, and at this time, I had a really great English teacher. Um, he doesn't really teach at my school anymore. But he really encouraged me to apply for, some of the writing summer programs for teens and high schoolers. And I did apply and I actually got in to two, and I ended up going to the Kenya Young Writers program, which was in Ohio. And during those 2 weeks, I would say was like the first time I actually like truly like wrote full time, because we were writing like 6 to 8 hours a day. I was also really lucky to go with like a lot of really talented and like already really accomplished poets who at my age, like some of them already had books, some of them had books coming out. And then because of that, they like just really pushed me to, like pursue the craft and like pursue it in a way that was personal to me. And I think that like finding them and like having that community of just like of like support as I navigated it, I think my junior year like made it really easy for me. Like they were really helpful. They like taught me, like, oh, like this is how, you get your work out there. This is how you advocate for yourself. Like this is all of these things that I really didn't have experience with. But I was really eager to learn. And I think that because of that, I had a quicker like jump into the poetry community than most people, because I had all this support, and I really like credit it all to them, and I credit it all to my school and like everyone who got me here, because I think that without them I like wouldn't have gotten into writing in the first place.
Speaking of which,
Wow.
Mercury, would you talk a little bit about your school? I'm sorry to interrupt, Antoinette, but could you talk
No,
us
no.
a little bit about your school? Because I think it's a really special place.
Yeah, I got a scholarship to come here actually. And I was really honored. I'm from Texas, so yeah, coming here was like a big leap. Um, and Loomis is like a boarding school. It's like a really cool place. There's a lot of resources for just everyone, but like there's just a lot of resources for writing. And I feel like I think that through all the resources and like the teachers here who really care about craft and like really care about writing, I think that through them I was able to like step out of my comfort zone and like submit to some places and like put myself into like different positions and opportunities that I wouldn't have been able to like even know about if I went to a different school. And I think that that's like what I really valued.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about your writing practice, because you're in school and you're active, in a lot of things. I was just wondering, like, when do you write, and what is your practice like?
I would say I think junior year I was like trying to get my craft. I think I was trying to like practice my writing as much as possible. And I wrote every day for a good like 4 or 5 months. And then after I got poet laureateship, I actually kind of became more intentional with my writing and just like where I was putting myself, what my emotions were when I wrote. So then that became like, like more of like twice a week, once a week. Um, and so I think that through that, that was like, I think that's my writing practice. I was also really fortunate because writing is something that was integrated into a lot of my classwork and a lot of the other things I do. And Youth Poet Laureateship was also integrated pretty smoothly with that. My book, BLOODPATHS, I actually wrote for a class project. So it had like artwork that I did for my art class, and it had like writing that I did, and then like my teacher read my writing. So then due to all of that, like I think as a collection to that, like I just like was able to find time, and I was able to find space for myself to like explore my writing and then just do all of that as well. I think during this time last year, in junior year, I also worked at a museum, but I was working remotely, so I was like helping do archiving and just like interacting with like a lot of the archives and like the artifacts like also really informed me. My sophomore year, I worked at an antique store, so then like storytelling and like understanding different stories and perspectives was also something that was really important to me. And just like overall, I think there were a lot of things that informed how I write and like why I write the way I do. But yeah. that's like a short version of it.
How about you, Antoinette? What's your background with poetry? I know you talked a little bit about it this past weekend. I'd love to have you tell the folks here too.
Um, yeah, I kind of discovered poetry when I was about 7. I'd like to say that I think my grandmother led me here, whether she realized it or not. She always gave me books. I recently sat down and thought about it, and my grandmother never gave me a toy my entire life, but she gave me books, and I still have sets of encyclopedias that she gave me when I was younger. So I was always reading, and I have to laugh about it too, that my grandmother and my mother didn't have an understanding of what was like age appropriate literature. So they didn't give me kid books. I was reading Shakespeare and Tolstoy and Valley of the Dolls and whatever else was on, the New York Times bestseller list. In their mind, as long as I was reading, I was doing what I should be doing. So just go read. Like, okay. Um, and at some point, I was given a collection of African American poetry and discovered for myself Langston Hughes and then later Gwendolyn Brooks. And there was something about this type of language that was so different than anything else that I had read, that really impacted me, and that set me on this path. So I sought out poetry from then on. And I can remember one Christmas getting a little blue typewriter and hunting and pecking my first little poems on that. So yeah, poetry has been my life for quite some time. As far as practice, I can remember when my children were little, I would write from 4 a.m. in the morning till 6 a.m. in the morning, then wake them up, get them ready for school, send them off, teach all day, come back, grade papers until I fell asleep and do the same thing. That's how I wrote my first 2 books. My kids are all grown now, so I can find other pockets of time, because there's no way now that I could get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and be productive from 4 to 6 a.m. Yeah, nah, that wouldn't work for me now. But that's, but like Mercury was saying, inspiration is all around us. I love that you said that you were in an antique store and the things there inspired you and made you think about storytelling. I used to love to watch the Scripps Spelling Bee. I often joke about the fact that it was the only thing I ever watched on ESPN. They used to carry it in the beginning, but it's on a different, network now. But I liked the sounds of the words, and those sounds and definitions would inspire me to write. A lot of my images from my first book came from natural images that I learned on NPR, because I would listen to Science Friday on the way home from work. And they were always talking about this bird or that flower, or, that's where I learned that if you upset a sea cucumber, it'll spit its guts at you. And so while you're trying to untangle yourself, it skirts away. And I thought, oh my God, that's so rich, And of course, that ended up in the book. But yeah, it's kind of, it becomes a way of life, I guess, where you're always looking at things through your poet's eye.
Excellent. Mercury, any questions that you have at all?
Yeah, I actually do. So I guess like I have two questions. My first question was just how do you see like writing as a part of a community, right? Because I think that a lot of times, like we as poets, we write about individual experiences and our own perspectives, but how do you think like writing, you were a Cave Canem fellow, how do you think like writing in those spaces can push you out of your comfort zone and like encourage you to write differently?
I think that's a fabulous question. A lot of times, writing is looked at as a solitary endeavor, and in a way, it is. You go back to your own little world, and you pour yourself out onto the paper. But very much like what you expressed earlier about the people who encouraged you, the people who taught you, who shared, craft with you, who engaged with you in those conversations, that's all a part of the writing process. So you mentioned Cave Canem, which is a foundation for emerging African American poets. I learned a lot from that particular community. And I learned about the practice of writing. I learned not to give up. Um, I learned how to receive honest feedback, and to have my poems interrogated by careful eyes, to be able to have a conversation about the choices that I made on the page. Um, Also, 2020 is when I was actively engaged in a collaboration. I had never done any kind of collaborative work with poetry until I joined Margaret Nelson and Kate Rushin and Rhonda Ward to write Witness Stone's poems, which were poems about formerly enslaved individuals. And we would meet online and share our research because we wanted our poems to be as historically accurate as possible. And we worked with a historian, and that collaboration really showed me that that we could, one, work together and support each other on a single project, but that we could also present that to a much larger community in the service of, history and community, people getting together and understanding the past and why we are in the present that we're in, and starting to think about ways that we would want to be different in the future. Um, and I think that's a long, long answer to your question, but I think poetry is very important. Excuse me. Well, poetry is important to community, but community is important to poetry as well. And I'm really finding that even more as I am, going through my tenure. I've had the opportunity to meet with, talk to, collaborate with all kinds of amazing poets who have different perspectives. Oh, now there was another thing that you said about our work coming from our own individual experience, and how does that affect community? What I've come to learn about poetry is that even when it comes from an individual's personal experience, once it's offered up to the world, um, other people find themselves in and among that language. And it becomes comfort, it becomes instruction, it becomes peace. Um, no one wants to feel like they're alone, but I think we've all read poetry and we go, oh, wow, that's exactly how I feel. But now someone has put it into words. And now that it's named, I better understand it. And now that it's named, I know what to do with it. Um, so yeah, I think even when poetry begins with the personal, it can't help but become universal. And if it's not your experience, then it opens your eyes to someone else's experience in the world, which I think creates empathy, which is important and impactful and so desperately needed.
Mercury, did you have a second question for Antoinette?
I did actually. I was also wondering, like because we both write a lot of ekphrases, and you've said before as a visual artist you see a lot of inspiration from that, and you just explained a lot of your other inspiration and sources of inspiration. How do you moderate the line between ekphrasis and originality?
Oh, wow, that's a great question. Um, I see my poetry as being in conversation with. So when we're having this conversation back and forth, you're coming from your perspective, I'm coming from my perspective, and we're sharing and we're learning from each other. So I don't see that a piece based on another piece is less original or imaginative in and of itself. I think that it is in conversation with. For example, my book, These Women You Gave Me, was danced by the New England Ballet and choreographed by Sarah Grace, a choreographer from New York. And when she met with me and said, what are you hoping that this project will look like? I said, this is an entirely different art form. This is an entirely different genre. I want you to read the book and do with the dance what you will. And so I understand that these two pieces would be in conversation with each other. And that was her world. And I was just happy for us to be in conversation. She did a beautiful and amazing job. So I think when people write poetry in response to other works of art, history, um, uh, science, I think it's another way for us to interrogate that material and see another side of it. It's like lifting it up and turning it over and peeking and going around, and sometimes even entering into it and looking out.
Great. I'd love to have you each read one more poem if you could. I know I probably didn't prepare you for that, but is that a possibility?
Sure,
Mercury, would you be okay with that? Good. Okay. So Antoinette, if you wanted to start us off, that would be wonderful.
Okay, I will read a definition of flying for Amelia Earhart. Fly, intransitive verb, to move in or pass through the air with wings, whether by wax and feathers, articulated linen, curtain, paper, bamboo, and cork, yielding to box kite, lufting to wing warp, glide, to move through the air with Icarus abandon into the loose grip of a startled sky, to rush ahead before the wind, to sleep in the realm of clouds and dream a most sincere waking dream, a breakthrough to where the crutch of reality has been kicked away, to wave as in goodbye to other loves, instead to soar into the air for want of breath, to take flight, to flee from the gravity of social convention, but then to fade, as in engines muffled by distant air, to discover, to disappear from known maps and grids, to vanish from sight.
Beautiful. I love that. The line about the crutch of reality kicked away. Beautiful. Mercury?
Yeah, I have one poem. It's an ekphrasis after the Wong Kar-wai movie Chungking Express, which just came out in 1994, and it's titled Duplex in the Night Market. The city is defined by its love and longing. Below the neon signs, there's nothing but night. At night, the streets fill with smoke and lust. Everyone I know is looking for something to give. I search within myself and I find I have nothing other than my hands. With them, I open myself to hurt. Through labor, I express my love for him. All day long, I clean his sheets and floors. I do the honest work. No one's honest with each other nowadays. A girl told me she loved me, then took off on a plane. Sometimes I look at planes take off from my balcony. I call up my ex-lover and tell her I miss her near me. I phone a landline that's long been buried under concrete. This loveless city, there's no room left for my longing.
Wonderful. Duplex. I know, Antoinette, you also write in a lot of form too. Duplex was a very cool form invented by Jericho Brown. Could I ask each of you? I mean, wait, you know what? Before I ask another question, does anyone in the audience have a question they'd like to ask? Oh, go ahead, Jimmy. Please, you can put on your mic.
Yeah, I had two questions for Mercury. One is I'm the advisor for the New Hampshire Teen Poet Laureate program. We do it a little different. We have like a team, so we have 11 poets from different high schools because we're trying to attract more poets that may not be as good as, say, some others and try and get into different schools. So if she'd like to connect with them, I'd be happy to send information to you, Barb, and you could, we could help have them meet up.
That would be wonderful. Is that okay, Mercury? Would you be willing to help out with that?
Yeah, and we might be able to work out a reading together or something like that.
That would be great.
My second question is for Mercury is why did you change your planets from Mercury to Saturn? What made you do that?
When I started writing, I didn't really want, like so many things that I wrote attached to me, and I think in retrospect, that was probably a good idea. Also for me, I wanted something that when I had a pseudonym, I wanted something that was true to me, right? And it was something that people that knew me would see it and be able to tell that it was me, but people that didn't know me wouldn't really be able to know. And I think that choosing a metonym, choosing a different planet, was something that really was something that was true to me and something that I think made me really confident in submitting my writing. And then I think now, especially that since I just got into college and I'm meeting so many people also from my school that I'm going to school with next year, I think it was something that I am really grateful that past me did, because when people Google my name, not all of my poems come up, and I can very selectively share what I want to share with them. And I think that's that inherent idea of privacy and just having my work be something personal and belonging to myself was something that I wanted, and it ended up working out for me.
Interesting.
Great. Any other questions? Well, this was wonderful. Thank you so much, Antoinette and Mercury, and audience members too. Best of luck to you both. I'm sure you still have some paths to blaze for us for the community. So anyway, Lucy, thank you, Ridgefield Library and Lucy Hanley, for hosting us this evening. And thank you again for coming. Have a good evening and see you soon.
Thank you.
Well, thanks, Antoinette. Thank you, Mercury. This was great.